Well, good morning, everybody. It's great to see you. If we've not met before, my name is Chris. It's all the Chris's today. My name is Chris, and I'm the senior minister here at the church. Great to see those of you who have been online with us as well already this morning. Great to have you with us, and great to have all of our kids and young people in with us on this Big Story Sunday as well. Now, with the adults, this year, we have been taking a theme for the year that we'll be carrying on with through the whole of this year called Companion. And we've been imagining ourselves walking with a companion. So out on a hike somewhere with a companion alongside us. And as we walk, we start to talk about some of the very biggest questions of life. If you imagined yourself in that situation, what are the sorts of questions that you might ask? Well, you might be asking questions about meaning and purpose, and is there a God? And if there is a God, how do I connect with God? And maybe you'd be asking questions about what about the pain and suffering that's in the world all around us and sometimes in my life too. And maybe you'd be asking questions about identity, about who am I? What's my place in the world? And in this chapter of this companion theme that is following us through the year, that's exactly what we're asking. We're asking about identity. We're asking about where do we find our roots and how do we root ourselves well. And today I'm launching that series by talking about the source of all life. So let's talk roots for a moment. And kids and young people, I know you've got your activity sheets, but I'd love for you to help me with this conversation about roots just now. And I've got some questions I wanted to ask you. And here's the first one. If we have our first picture up, how many trees can you see in this picture? How many trees can you see in this picture? Anybody willing to have a bit of a guess? Yes? More than 5. That's a great shout. Yes, there's more than 5. Anybody else? Anybody else want to have a guess how many trees you can see? 60, good guess. At our first service this morning, somebody said lots. I thought that was a really good guess as well. So maybe 5, more than 5, maybe 60, maybe lots. Josh, how many trees are there actually in this picture? There's one tree in this picture. Do you know where this tree is? Okay, so this tree is it's a quaking aspen tree in Pando in Utah. And it has 47,000 stems. So 47,000 things that look like trees and that blossom like that, but are actually all connected by a single root. Can you imagine that? So they are actually one living organism that has one root, and that root spans 106 acres. The root system for this tree, 106 acres. But it is one tree with 47,000 stems. How about that? Okay, here's another question then I've got about roots. Roots are really strong and can crush stones. Is that true or is that false? True. Who thinks it's true? Okay, lots of us think it's true. You're right, it's true. Roots are really strong. You only have to see this kind of thing, and we see this around and about us sometimes, don't we? That roots can crush stones, push up tarmac, and cut through even roads. What about this one? Roots can be above ground and not just underground. Is that true or is that false? True, you're absolutely right. In the rainforests in particular around the world, the air is warm and humid, and some rainforest plants have learned to hang their roots out in the air and take the nutrients that they need that often they would get out of the soil from the air around them instead. What about this one? Roots are a one-way street bringing water and nutrients out of the ground up into the plant above. Is that true or is that false? Who thinks true? Okay, who thinks false? Okay, who's not really caring one way or the other? Sorry, that's unfair. Who just doesn't want to put their hands up? Okay, it's actually false. Because roots are actually a two-way street, a two-way system. Because yes, they absolutely take nutrients and water up out of the ground, but almost 40% of a plant's energy goes back through its roots out into the soil around it, directed down through the roots and out into the soil. And that energy is released as sugary carbohydrates that attract microbes to the roots to in turn feed the roots better. How amazing is that? Roots are a two-way street. Here's an easy one. We eat roots. True or false? True. You're absolutely right. Can anybody, this is quite easy. This is a root that we eat. Does anybody know what this is? Carrots. Does anybody know what this is? Might be a little bit more difficult. Does anybody know what this is? This is cassava. Cassava, which is another root that we can eat. Here's one I really like. Roots can talk to each other. Roots can talk. Is that true? Is that false? True. This blew my mind when I read about this a couple of weeks ago. This is absolutely true that roots communicate to one another, and they communicate to one another by emitting chemical signals and hormones into the soil that trigger other plants to change their behavior on the basis of those chemicals and those hormones that they receive. And this was confirmed by an experiment on tomato plants that showed when a destructive caterpillar attacked one plant, that plant sent hormones into the soil that caused a neighboring plant to increase its defensive enzymes and improve resistance to that particular form of caterpillar. Is anybody else's mind blown by that? That roots can communicate. It's believed that roots can produce more than 100,000 different chemical signals to enable them to communicate to each other. It's extraordinary. So roots are an amazing thing. And of course, without solid roots, trees and plants and flowers can't flourish. And in fact, they may well even die. They certainly can't grow into the amazing plant or tree or flower that they were intended to grow into. Well, what is true of roots is true of human beings, I think, too. That when it comes to our identity, where we are rooted really matters. And without good roots, we can't grow and flourish into the people we were always intended to be. And this is true for us, whether we would say we were a Christian or not, whether we were a person of faith or not, whether we're here today with great questions about faith, exploring faith, not sure what we believe, or whether we're here today and we've been Jesus followers for a long time. This is true for all of us. All of us need to be rooted in good places. We need strong roots that will help us to grow and flourish. And if we don't have strong roots like that, then we can't grow into all that we were intended to be, all that we should be. And it's in fact worse than that. Without finding somewhere to be rooted, it can cause all sorts of problems. I think one of the things we're seeing in the Western world these days is that people are struggling to know where to find their roots. And that's causing a whole load of stuff to go on at a societal level that's demonstrating that when we take away roots and being planted somewhere, it causes all sorts of problems. The culture wars that we see around us these days, the struggle for somewhere to go for an ethical and moral compass, the struggle for purpose and for truth, and indeed that whole societal angst that we feel that so often plays out in public arguments and fights and disputes, actually is caused by a lack of a place to plant solid and firm roots. And what's true for us as a society and a culture is true for us individually as well. When we don't have somewhere to be rooted, we struggle with identity, with purpose, with meaning, with where we should prioritize our time and our energies. We struggle with our sense of who we are, and we struggle with our emotional and our mental health. If we don't have that sense of somewhere to be rooted, it plays out in ways like this. See if you recognize any of these things from our culture, our society. Maybe you've even said them yourself. These, to me, are indicators that we're struggling to know where to place our roots, where to find our identity. When we start to say things like this: you live your truth and I'll live mine. Look inside yourself for who you really are. You do you. If it works for you, then that must be good. You go for it. However you feel is what's true. And that's a huge problem. And the reason why that's a huge problem, because all those things are about us looking inside of our own selves for our sense of identity and purpose. And the problem with that is when life gets hard, or we begin to struggle, or other people hurt us, or things go wrong, or even worse than that, life feels like it's coming crashing down, we lose any sense of who we are because we've only looked inside ourselves. And when that starts to get challenged, then we start to lose what we're about if we've only looked inside ourselves for our sense of identity and purpose. So in this chapter of our companion theme, we're asking, where's the best place to find my sense of self, of who I am, of what my identity is? Where do we need to grow strong roots? Where do we need to plant ourselves to find those things? And we need what plants needs when it comes to our roots. We need fertile soil to be planted in. We need to be fed and we need to be nourished. So we're asking this question, where should I plant my roots? So let's turn to our companion for this year and ask that question, where should I go to plant my roots? Now, our companion, the companion that we've been using with the adults through this year, is the writer of a letter to a bunch of people called the Hebrews. These were people who were following Jesus, who'd come out of the Jewish faith 2,000 years ago and were following Jesus. They believed in his claims and who he was, and they started following him. And our companion writes this letter to a bunch of them gathered in different places, and talks about what it means to follow Jesus and some of the very biggest questions of life. And in chapter 11 of this amazing letter, in the first couple of verses, we get, first of all, a two-part definition of faith. And this is going to start leading us to where we might plant our roots. So we get this two-part definition of faith. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. Our companion wants us to know that faith in Jesus and faith in God is not blind confidence. More than half of the verses in the letter to the Hebrews are dedicated to explaining the reasons and the evidence to accept that Jesus was who he said he was and that he really had done the things that the followers of Jesus were saying he had done. So the author of this letter, our companion, really wants us to know that faith is not gullible or senseless. Our companion wants us to know that faith makes sense. And our companion specifically here wants us to know that faith is exemplified by trust. And that trust can and should be based on what we know or can know of God. And then we can use that to rely on the things that we don't know. If we base faith on what we can see of God and trust in him for the future, it becomes the assurance of things that we can hope for and can help us and sustain us with the things we don't see or the things we don't know or some of the doubts that we might have. Faith is being certain of what you hope for and finding assurance in that for what you do not see. And the word for being confident here, in the original Greek that this letter was written in to this group of people, is the word hypostatis, which is actually a noun rather than a verb, and was used to communicate the idea of substance or firmness or confidence. And sometimes it was used for a collection of documents that established ownership of something or a guarantee of something or a proof of something. So when it's used here, it could be understood to convey a sense of firm, solid confidence, or a calm courage, or a reassurance. Faith, our companion tells us, is the resolute confidence in God. And the word for assurance in the original Greek means conviction. But here's what's really important about that word. It's not a static word. It's not a word that implies emotional complacency. It's something lively and active, and it is not, and hear me right on this, Christians in the room, it is not immovable dogmatism. It is not like, I know the truth and I've got to beat everybody else over the head with it. That's not what this means. And sometimes, if we're being really honest, Christians have not been great with immovable dogmatism. Sometimes they have judged everybody else who might think a little bit differently or might even believe something about the Christian faith a little bit differently to what they do. This is not immovable dogmatism, but it is something that is built on a solid and a firm foundation. It gives assurance. It's something that we can reach out and lay our hands on and that we can rely on, but it is living and active, and it's something upon which hope can be fixed, but it also impels a response. So this is faith. This is the definition of faith. Resolute confidence and a fixed but living and active hope. That's faith. And so the next follow-up question, if we were having our hike with our companion who's explaining to us the definition of faith, the next question we would ask our companion, I'm sure, and we probably all ask us this same thing, where do I find the source of that then? Where do I find the source of that resolute confidence and that living and active hope? Well, our companion calls to mind the creation story as a way of finding the source of that confidence and hope. Our companion calls to mind the creation and the creative Word of God that called forth various aspects of the world that we see around us. So in verse 3, our companion says, by faith, we understand that the entire universe was formed at God's command, that what we now see did not come from anything that can be seen. So if God is capable of making all that we see around us from nothing that could be seen before then, well, God is a worthwhile source of hope and confidence. Faith is what looks at the created order all around us and sees the evidence that points to a divine creator in all of that and uses that to find a firm and resolute confidence in the God to whom it bears witness, who, although unseen, has provided a foundation for such a confidence through his mighty acts. What we can see as a result all around us of those mighty acts points us to the source that cannot be seen. Our companion is calling to mind the great creation story of God. And we find that creation story in the very first words that are in our Bible, in the Old Testament part of the Bible, in the very first book, Genesis. We find the account of the creation order of God. And it's account of how God, with full purpose and full intention, made everything that exists. And it's more than likely that those verses were originally written by Moses, he of the Exodus fame. And during the time when he wrote it, many cultures of the day engaged in worship of the sun, the moon, the stars, the seas, the sea creatures, and the natural wonders. And that culture that Moses was a part of has echoes of our culture today, the naturalism and scientism of our day, which is the basis upon which some of the attempts have been made to strip away the overarching narrative and story of God and instead to replace it with a naturalism or a scientism that says there is no God. But Moses wrote this to counter that way of thinking. Moses wrote this to say that none of those small g gods that you worship, sun, moon, stars, all those things, none of those are gods. They were created by one true God. And you see, Moses didn't write those words to be a science manual for how God created. So we can debate the how all we like, and that's okay. We're happy to have that conversation. But the how is not what's important. Moses wrote those words to tell us who and why. And we know that to be true because of the poetic nature of the way Moses wrote those words. If he was trying to write a science manual, he wouldn't have included all the poetry that he includes in it. And there are so many pointers and so many bits of poetic beauty in the story in Genesis chapter 1 that Moses wrote for us. Here's just one example. There is this recurring thing where God creates an environment that will sustain something before then he goes on to create the thing that is to be sustained. And that is a recurring pattern. So on days 1 to 3, God creates environments. And then further on in the creation story, he creates the things to populate those environments. So on day 1, God creates light. And then on day 4, the sun, the moon, and the stars to distribute that light. On day 2, God creates the oceans. And on day 5, the creatures that swim in the oceans. And on day 3, he creates dry land and vegetation. And on day 6, he creates the animal and human life to consume the fruits of that environment. There's just beautiful poetry through that account. And the most important thing is that God created. And then God created the very most important thing of all. Now, kids and young people, I know you have been looking at your sheets and filling in your sheets while I've been talking there, but I wonder if you just would come back to me just for a second, because I have got in my box here the very most important thing that God created. I've got a picture in here of the most important thing that God created, and I wondered if 1 or 2 people might come up and see for themselves the very most important thing that God created. I'm going to step down here, so I'm just telling the camera guys, I'm stepping down here. You will be on the live stream, that's what I do need to say, so parents, if your kids come up at this point, they will be on our live stream. Would you like to come and see? Come and, I'm just going to sit here. Come up here. Can you, look, come around here, because I don't want to show everybody else, because it's just for you. Can you see a picture in there of the very most important thing that God created? What is it? It's a mirror. What does the mirror show? Can you see a picture of you? Yeah. Can you see that? What's the very most important thing that God created? Can you see? What is it? What is it? You. It's you, isn't it? Yes. Can you see? How cool is that? How cool is that? Right. You can go back to your seats. Has everybody seen? If you haven't seen yet, have a look in my box there. Can you see? Can you see? Oh, there you are. Can you see? What is it? So in my box, I don't know whether you can see out there, I've got the very most important thing that God created, and it's not a mirror. The very most important thing that God created is you. It's you. Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 to 28 says this, "Then God said, 'Let us make human beings in our image to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the wild animals on the earth, and the small animals that scurry along the ground.' So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them." Just in those 2 very short verses from that much longer chapter where God's creation story is revealed to us, just in those 2 small verses, 3 times we hear God say, in the image of God, human beings were created. And in all the other days of the creation story, when it gets to the end of the day, God says it was good. He says what he has made is good. On the end of the day where he creates human beings in his own image, he says it's really good. It's very good. So human beings are the very pinnacle of God's creation. And they're created, we are created in the image of God. What does it mean to be created in the image of God? Well, we're told there that to be created in the image of God means that God has given human beings a certain kind of awareness which animals, fish, birds have not been given. Human beings have the unique capacity for reason and morality and language and personality and purpose. We have this amazing capacity to experience and understand love, to experience and understand truth and beauty. And that's what makes us human, right? That's what makes us human. And if you don't believe in a who or a why behind creation, then you have a really tough challenge to answer the question about where do those things come from? If we are simply evolved animals, where do things like personality and love and passion and a sense of morality, where do those come from? How do you evolve reason, morality, personality, purpose, and love? Even the most ardent atheist would have to concede that at the very least, the Christian faith has an answer to the question of where those things come from. They come because human beings are created in the image of God. And even, I think, the most ardent atheist would have to admit it's very hard to explain where those things come from without a divine presence. And it's entirely reasonable to believe that there is a divine presence behind the whole of the created order that we see. We've done lots of talks on this in the past that you can go back and find. But increasing numbers of people who have been ardent and passionate atheists, often in academic circles, are looking again at the story of God because they find that a strict atheism does not explain the world. Even people like Richard Dawkins, one of the most ardent atheists, has confessed recently he considers himself to be a cultural Christian because there are these huge questions that simply holding on to atheism does not answer. But this is even more important than being a reasonable way to explain things. You see, to be created in the image of God means that you and I and every human being are part of a bigger story, that we have a deep value and a deep purpose that goes way beyond ourselves. There is a God outside of us who values us enough to create us in his image. To know that we are created and part of a bigger story is huge. And kids and young people, you've got a little bag like this, or your parents have got these at the moment. We'd love for you to have those right now. Parents, you just need to supervise your kids because it's got a pointy stick in it, and we don't want anybody doing themselves any damage or poking themselves with a stick. But we would love for you to open up your little bags, and inside it you've got a little human being. And you can use your pointy stick to decorate your human being. And we would love for you to decorate your human being in a gorgeous and beautiful way as a reminder to you that all human beings, including you, are created in the image of God. And then it kind of puts together in a key ring. And then you can have that as a reminder through the rest of this week that you are created in the image of God, just like every other human being. That's quite cool, isn't it? We should have given those to everybody, I reckon. Adults are a little bit jealous now, I think. But just supervise the pointy sticks, that's all we're asking. You know, we need an identity to really flourish. To really flourish and grow into all that we were made to be, we need an overarching story. And you and I are part of a bigger story. And it's a story of God that is entirely reasonable to believe. You don't have to suspend your intellect or your thinking to believe the Bible explanation of the bigger story. And when we try to live without a bigger story or an overarching narrative for our lives, we quickly find it impossible. And we struggle and we fail. When we plant the roots of our identity in how we feel, we place our confidence and our trust in ourselves and in our own capacity, it's really dangerous. And here, just lean in for a second, everybody. Here's the thing I want you to take away from today more than anything else. When we look inward for our identity, that may work whilst we're doing okay and life is good. But as soon as we struggle or our health fails or our circumstances change for the worst, all of that comes crushing down, including our identity with it. When we look inward and we start to believe those things like my truth and your truth and my feelings determine what's true for me and you do you, they may work for a while, but they are a false idol. Because they make us feel better maybe for a while, but they crash and burn when we crash and burn. When life gets hard or life gets tough or it doesn't go the way we want it to or we don't get what we think we deserve, if our roots are only in ourselves and the state of our lives, then we're in big, big trouble. And placing our roots in and of ourselves, they are shallow roots. They are not strong roots. They are not firm and solid, and they do not provide the nutrients that we need. When we're willing to look outside of ourselves for our identity, when we're willing to place our faith and our confidence and our trust in the bigger story of God, in whose image we are made, then it changes all of that. If we are prepared, instead of looking inward for our roots and our identity, to look outwards, it provides a much more solid foundation and much stronger roots for our lives and for our flourishing. And the good news is that to grow our roots in God makes sense. It's not, as our companion tells us, it's not blind faith, it's not gullible, and it's not senseless. It's reasonable and provides a way to see the world and our place in it that is good and that is not dependent on our circumstances for our sense of joy and well-being. And it is true. It is real truth. And it always has been true. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, we are amazed and in awe at the created order and beauty we see all around us. We thank you that it points us to a creator behind it all. And we thank you that most importantly of all, it points us to a creator who says to us, you are the most important thing in all of creation. Human beings are the thing I value most. Human beings have such dignity and such worth because they are created in the image of God. And I want to pray for each and every one of us here today, that if we take nothing else away from today, that we take away this truth and this reality, we are made in the image of God. We are made in the image of God, and that gives us worth and value. It provides fertile soil, knowing that provides fertile soil in which to plant ourselves and set our roots and to find the food and the nourishment that we need for our flourishing and for our growth, no matter what the circumstances of the world or our lives are around us. When we have those roots planted in that soil, we can still grow and we can still flourish. So help us to look to you for our roots. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.